Welcome to the Project Management Prepcast, helping you prepare for the PMP exam. Here's your instructor, Cornelius Fichtner.
Hello and welcome to the Project Management Prepcast, where we have a lot at stake in your ability to pass the PMP exam. I'm your instructor, Cornelius Fichtner. In this lesson, we will focus on the process and importance of identifying and analyzing stakeholders. Since politics play a major role on any project, identifying and knowing who and what type of stakeholders you have is critical to project success. Building rapport and engaging key stakeholders will be required in each phase of your project. So in this presentation, we'll look at who the stakeholders are, analysis of our stakeholders, and classification and categories of stakeholders. In part 1 of this lesson, we will see an overview of the process, discuss the inputs, and we will get halfway through the tools and techniques, which we finish off in part 2 and then close with the one output and do a review. Let us start with a definition. Project stakeholder management includes the processes that are required to identify the people, groups, or organizations that could impact or be impacted by the project, to analyze stakeholder expectations and their impact on the project, and to develop appropriate management strategies for effectively engaging stakeholders in project decisions and executions. And as you should know by now, this definition of the knowledge area is then translated into activities. And these activities are identify and analyze stakeholders, create a plan to manage stakeholder engagement, and control stakeholder engagement. And these activities, of course, become the processes of the knowledge area. So, let's continue with our overview of the processes of the knowledge area. So, project stakeholder management has 4 processes, and they are distributed across our 4 distinct process groups. Identify stakeholders is in initiating, and therefore in the initiating process group. Plan stakeholder management is obviously in planning, as the name would indicate. Manage stakeholder engagement occurs in executing. And finally, controlling stakeholder engagement is in monitoring and controlling. Let's look at these 4 processes in detail. Identify stakeholders is the focus of this lesson here. It is the process of identifying all people, groups, or organizations that could impact or be impacted by a decision, activity, or outcome of the project, and analyzing and documenting relevant information regarding their interests, involvement, interdependencies, influence, and potential impact on project success. Then we have plan stakeholder management. This is the process of developing appropriate management strategies to effectively engage stakeholders throughout the project lifecycle, based on the analysis of their needs, interests, and potential impact on project success. Manage stakeholder engagement is the process of communicating and working with stakeholders to meet their needs, expectations, address issues as they occur, and foster appropriate stakeholder engagement in project activities throughout the project lifecycle. And finally, control stakeholder engagement. That's the process of monitoring overall project stakeholder relationships and adjusting strategies and plans for engaging stakeholders. Stakeholder management is the overall process in which we manage the expectations and engagement of key stakeholders to obtain their support throughout the project. By identifying and getting to know the project stakeholders during initiation, we lay a foundation for project success. Identifying stakeholders is the first step of project stakeholder management, and it's vital that we build positive and supportive relationships, especially with key project stakeholders. Getting to know the stakeholders and understanding their needs and expectations and potential influence provides the information required to effectively manage them. Once the stakeholders have been identified and their levels of interest, importance, and influence have been determined, a strategy can be developed for approaching and ensuring the appropriate level of involvement. The involvement and support of key stakeholders will pay dividends throughout the project. A stakeholder is defined as follows: an individual, group, or organization who may be affected by, or perceive itself to be affected by a decision, activity, or outcome of a project. A stakeholder may also exert influence over or impact the project and its deliverables. The term stakeholder implies the individual has a stake in the project or initiative. They have something at risk. Consequently, they have something to gain or lose depending on the outcome of the project. And the Identify Stakeholders process is defined as the process of identifying the people, groups, or organizations that could impact or be impacted by a decision, activity, or outcome of the project, and analyzing and documenting relevant information regarding their interests, involvement, interdependencies, influence, and potential impact on project success. If you noticed on the previous slide, some of the keywords were highlighted: identifying, analyzing, documenting. There's a reason for this, because these three keywords, they define what it is that we really do in this process. So let's take a look at these three keywords. The first keyword is identifying. This means that we will gather general and specific information about our stakeholders. The tool that we use to identify our stakeholders is, of course, expert judgment. Then we have analyzing. Once identified, we will analyze them using a technique called stakeholder analysis, and together with the expert judgment, we will determine communication requirements, expectations, their influence and interest. These factors will allow us to classify the type of stakeholder, like he's a supporter, she's neutral, he is a resistor, etc. And lastly, documenting. During our analysis and in our use of expert judgment, we document all relevant information in the identification, assessment, and the classification sections of the stakeholder register. As always, this figure here lists the inputs, tools and techniques and outputs from the PMBOK guide for the Identify Stakeholder process. And as you can see, we take 4 specific inputs: the project charter, procurement documents, enterprise environmental factors, and organizational process assets, and we apply our tools and techniques to produce the stakeholder register as the output. The stakeholder register will allow us to effectively manage and leverage our stakeholders to increase our chance of project success. Identify Stakeholders is part of the initiating process group. This means, as we execute this process, our project is in its infancy. It has barely begun. Thus, we have a limited set of inputs. Here they are. The project charter, which may document internal or external stakeholders. For instance, you'll find the sponsor's name or the customer's name in this document, to name just 2. If this project has been started because someone bought a product or service, then we will very likely have procurement documents like a contract or a proposal. Just like the charter, the contents here will help us identify stakeholders. As part of the enterprise environmental factors, we should look at our company's organizational structure to help us understand the environment in which we will perform this project. There may be outside groups like government agencies or environmental groups that we must consider as stakeholders. Lastly, we can rely on our organizational process assets. Similar projects may have been done in the past, so there may be stakeholder registers from these old projects that we can look through. And that's all there really is to say about these inputs. There are only a few of them, and they help us to find and know our stakeholders. There are 3 tools and techniques in this process, and we will familiarize you with the first one by walking you through the stakeholder analysis. But we're not ignoring the expert judgment in this. The key statement here is that on every step of your stakeholder analysis, you will need to rely on the experience, the know-how, and the expert judgment of the team members, consultants, and stakeholders that help you perform the analysis. Without their expertise, you could not perform it. And on occasion, we will conduct profile analysis meetings with our experts to help us get a deeper understanding of our major players or more influential stakeholders. So, what can a stakeholder analysis do to help ensure a successful project? Let's look at a few ideas. First, a stakeholder analysis helps project and program managers understand the organization's environment around projects and initiatives. Next, it can reveal the interests of the stakeholders and compare them to the purpose and objectives of the project. With interests understood, the potential for conflicts can be anticipated, making it possible to assign a level of risk to the project's success. It will provide an opportunity to identify champions and challengers. We can then employ strategies to persuade opponents, or at least mitigate their opposition, and cultivate strong relationships with project champions. And lastly, it allows you to leverage existing relationships to build coalitions and potential partnerships to further champion the effort. These mutually supportive relationships help build valuable trust and collaboration among the stakeholders. Overall, stakeholder analysis will help anticipate individual and group objections to the project. This, in turn, allows you to propose the appropriate actions and strategies to overcome these objections. Stakeholder analysis will also identify individuals and groups that will likely support the project. You can employ strategies that will develop, strengthen, and broaden this support. By the way, stakeholder analysis is sometimes also called participation analysis because you analyze who participants are and how they participate. Let's take a look at the steps we take in the process of stakeholder analysis. The first step is to identify who your stakeholders are. The next step is to analyze and assess them to determine their power, influence, and interest. The next step is to classify or group them in order to determine the most important stakeholders and an appropriate approach and engagement strategy for each one of them. If necessary, you can conduct focused meetings, such as profile meetings, where you can gain a deeper understanding of the key stakeholders, such as their roles in the organization or potential role or impact on the project. And of course, throughout this process, you will document the identified stakeholders. They go into the stakeholder register. Maybe you also have a classification or you create a stakeholder map. That information too will be included in the stakeholder register. The concrete activities that you will perform in order to identify the stakeholders on your project, they will vary, of course, from project to project. Usually it's quite easy to identify your main stakeholders like the sponsor, customer, or senior management in your organization. Once you have these identified, you can then apply the following tools and invite some participants. Interviews can be conducted with the project management team or PMO, sponsors and customers, as well as other project managers. Workshops and meetings can be conducted with your project team and again the sponsors and customers and other project managers from the company. Document reviews with the project management team often yield information that is germane to the current project. And as we stressed earlier, the use of expert judgment, where you rely on consultants, project managers, and anyone who may possess information that will help you understand the influence and impact of your stakeholders. Here are some questions that you can ask during this process in order to identify the stakeholders. Who are the people that are directly involved in our project? Who within our organization will be impacted, have influence, or have a stake in the successful completion of this project? And who are the people who may not be directly involved in the project but may still have some level of interest or influence on the delivery of the project's objectives? Or who will be using the product, service, or result that our project here produces? Who might be interested, concerned, outraged, or even terrified of the project? And what external persons or groups may have some level of interest in the project? This is only a short list of the questions that you may want to ask, but they give you a starting point and will allow you to identify and classify your main stakeholders. And with that, we have come to the end of part 1 of this lesson. As I said earlier, we're going to stop in the middle of tools and techniques, and we'll move on. We'll continue with the tools and techniques in part 2. So this is the moment for Justine to say,
A, B, see you later.
And of course, I say, until next time.